It was one of those miserable winter days in central Chicago, the kind where the wind cuts right through you, carrying a nasty mix of snow and sleet from the northwest. I was feeling like absolute hell, coming down with what I was pretty sure was the flu. As a carpenter, I was used to working in all kinds of weather, but that day, we were out on an exposed job site, trying to frame up a house in the middle of an open ridge, and every gust of wind felt like a slap to the face. Lately, I'd been putting in extra hours, working as much overtime as I could. Money was always tight ever since we bought the big, brand new house a couple of years back, the one my wife, Jessica, had to have. But I was grinding through it because I had a goal. I wanted to take the kids down to Hawaii for spring break. A little sun, some sand, and let's be honest, I wasn't going to complain about the college girls running around in bikinis while we had our family vacation. But today, I was done. Between the fever, the pounding headache, and the bone-chilling cold, I finally gave in. I told the foreman I was heading home, and with one look at me, he practically shoved me off the site, telling me to get the hell out before I ended up with pneumonia. I didn't argue. Within minutes, I was in my old truck, cranking the heat and driving home. I thought about calling Jessica to let her know I was coming home early, but in my condition, even pulling out my phone felt like too much effort. Before I go any further, I should tell you a little about myself. My name's Mark Lawson. I'm 40 years old, 6 feet tall, and tipping the scales at around 220 pounds. Yeah, I carry a little extra weight, but I like my beer and my downtime when I'm not busting my ass at work. My hair's starting to thin out too, but I'm not exactly on the market, so who cares? Jessica and I have been married for 16 years. We went to high school together, started dating our senior year, and tied the knot not long after graduation. We started out living with my folks, which wasn't as bad as it sounds. My parents had a big old house with plenty of space, and Jessica got along well with my mom, which made things easier. My dad got me into carpentry, and I've been in the trade ever since. Jessica works part-time at a doctor's office 3 days a week, handling medical records and insurance claims. It doesn't bring in a fortune, but it helps with the bills. She's always been good-looking. Not the kind of glamorous woman who turns heads everywhere she goes, but naturally attractive. She's 5 feet 4 inches, about 140 pounds, carrying a little extra weight, just like me, but she wears it well, especially after having 2 kids. And yeah, even after all these years, she could still turn me on. Our kids, Brandon 15 and Emily 13, came early in our marriage. They're good kids, pretty average students, and we've always gotten along well as a family. I tend to be the disciplinarian, while Jessica is more of the nurturing type. I figured that's how it's supposed to be. By the time I pulled into the garage, it was about 1:30 in the afternoon, and I felt like absolute crap. All I wanted was a long, hot shower, a shot of NyQuil, and to crawl into bed for the rest of the day. Jessica was off work that day, so I figured she'd be home and could maybe give me a little sympathy, though I sure as hell didn't want to pass whatever I had on to her. As I parked, I noticed our car was gone. Probably out running errands or shopping, I figured. No big deal. I stumbled into the house, kicking off my boots and dragging myself upstairs to our bedroom, already fantasizing about that steaming shower washing away the chill and the aches. But the second I stepped into the bedroom, something felt off. Jessica always kept a neat house, borderline obsessive about it. But the bed was unmade, the top sheet and comforter pulled back like someone had just gotten out of it in a hurry. That was weird. I started stripping off my work clothes, ready to throw them on the floor when something caught my eye. There were wet spots on the bottom sheet, small, but noticeable. I hesitated, then reached down and touched one. It was damp, slimy. A cold, ugly feeling spread through my chest as I brought my fingers to my nose. The scent hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't sweat. It wasn't just her. And it sure as hell wasn't mine. My stomach twisted, my fevered brain trying to keep up. She's cheating on me. That thought alone made my head spin. I tried to remember the last time Jessica and I had sex. A few days ago? No. A week? Maybe more? Lately, I'd been too exhausted from work, coming home, eating, and crashing into bed. And now? Now this. I stood there, staring at the bed, my mind running in circles. Part of me wanted to tear the whole damn room apart, searching for more proof. But my fever, the pounding in my skull, and the sheer exhaustion were too much. I needed to sleep. I needed to think. I stumbled into the shower, letting the scalding water pour over me, but nothing could wash away the fury and humiliation clawing at my insides. I had just finished moving some of my personal things into the guest room when I heard the garage door go up. Jessica was home, and she wasn't alone. Voices carried from the kitchen. Then, hurried footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, she appeared at the top, pale as a ghost. "Oh, you're home," she stammered, her face going tight as she looked at me holding an armful of my clothes. "Yeah," I said flatly. "Didn't feel great. Came home early." She swallowed hard. I had to rush to the school. They called and said Brandon was sick. I just stared at her, my expression blank. "Yeah? Well, I'm sick too. So I'm going to bed." She glanced at the guest room door, confusion flickering across her face. "Why aren't you sleeping in our bed?" I met her eyes, my voice cold. "Because I don't want to get you sick. And I know you sure as hell wouldn't want to pass anything on to your lover." Her face went sheet white. What do you mean?" I jerked my chin toward our bedroom. "Go take a look at the bed. Then come back and tell me that isn't what I think it is." Jessica's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh God. Mark, Yeah." I cut her off. "I'll deal with this when I'm feeling better. But when I do, you better have a damn good explanation." Her legs wobbled, and she sagged against the wall, tears spilling down her cheeks. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. I stared at her, my voice like steel. "I don't know yet, but you'd better be ready to tell me who the hell he is." Her lip trembled. "Please, Mark. Don't honey me." I clenched my jaw, stepping into the guest room. "As far as I'm concerned, you broke our vows. We don't have a marriage anymore." I shut the door, and as I collapsed into bed, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I pushed myself up from the chair and rubbed my temples. "I'm going to bed now, Jessica," I said, my voice steady but cold. "But before I go, just remember this. We've been married for 16 years. You should know me better than anyone. Do you really think I'd ever accept what you're asking me to?" She didn't respond. She just stood there for a moment, staring at me, then turned and walked away. I watched her go, then sat there for a while, thinking about everything. About my life, my kids, and the betrayal I'd just uncovered. By 4 a.m., I had it all figured out. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just needed to meet with a lawyer and talk things over with my parents to make it happen. With that grim determination, I finally went back to bed, shutting out everything else. The next morning, I woke up around 9 a.m., still feeling like hell, but with a much clearer head. By then, the kids were already at school, and Jessica had gone to work. It was time to put my plan into action. First order of business, I called a divorce lawyer and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Then I made myself some breakfast, forced it down, and drove over to my parents' house. That conversation wasn't easy. They were shocked, angry, even. When I told them what Jessica had done, my mom teared up, my dad clenched his jaw, but in the end, they both agreed. I was doing the right thing. They said they'd support me no matter what. From there, I went to see Jessica's parents. If my folks were shocked, they were downright devastated. They couldn't believe their daughter would do something like this, jeopardize her marriage, hurt her family. I could tell they were struggling to process it, but they listened. And in the end, they understood how serious this was. After that, I made a few more stops, called our insurance agent, met with our family lawyer, and made some changes to my policy and my will. I wanted to make sure my kids were taken care of, no matter what happened next. By late afternoon, after a final phone call, I was ready. Now, all that was left was to tell Jessica my decision. While waiting for the kids to get home from school, I started moving my personal belongings into my truck. The second they walked through the door, I took them into the den and sat them down. This was the hardest part. Our kids were old enough to understand. I told them the truth, what their mother had done, what was going to happen. Their faces crumpled in disbelief, in pain. It crushed me to see them like that. "I know this hurts," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I need you both to know, no matter what, I'll always be here for you." They nodded, still in shock. After making sure they were okay, I drove them over to my parents' house before Jessica got home. I didn't want them around for what was coming next. Jessica walked in at her usual time, hanging her coat up before glancing over at me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. "Didn't go to work today?" she asked, her tone casual. "No," I said. "Had some things to take care of." She just shrugged and stepped toward me. "Where are the kids?" "At my folks' place." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Have you thought about what we discussed last night?" I leaned back in my chair and met her gaze. "Yeah," I said. "I've thought about it a lot. And today, I met with a divorce lawyer." Her face lit up. "So, it's settled then? You're going to go along with it? Let me have my little fling, and we'll move on with our lives?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, I told you last night. I'm not going to sit around, pay the bills, and let you screw another man. So I came up with a different plan." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I folded my arms. "I'm not divorcing you." Relief washed over her face, and she actually smiled. "So, you're willing to work through this?" I shook my head. "No, I just don't think you'll be cheating on me with John anymore." She blinked, confusion creeping in. What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "I called his wife today." Her breath hitched. "You didn't." "Oh, I did," I said, watching her face pale. "And I don't think you're going to have a job tomorrow." She sucked in a sharp breath, her hands shaking. "Oh my God, Mark." I cut her off. "I also quit my job." Now her eyes widened in full-blown panic. "Are you crazy? What are we supposed to live on?" I smirked. "We? I think you should be asking yourself that question." Her jaw clenched. "What are you saying?" I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice steady. "I'm leaving you, Jessica, but I'm not divorcing you. If you want out, you'll have to pay for it yourself." Her mouth fell open. You can't just leave me like that." "I can, and I will. You want a divorce? You can file for one. You can use abandonment as the cause. I don't care. But I'm done." Her expression twisted in horror. "What about the kids?" "My parents have agreed to look after them. If you can't support them, you'll probably have to sign over custody so they can get on my folks' insurance." Tears welled in her eyes. "Mark, how could you do this? How could you tell my parents? How could you just walk away?" I stood up, leveling her with a stare. "Oh, I don't know, Jessica. Maybe because you had the nerve to ask me to sit back and accept being cheated on. Maybe because you destroyed our marriage the second you decided to crawl into bed with another man. And maybe, just maybe, because you deserve to face the consequences of your actions." She gulped. I'll get a lawyer. I'll take you to court for abandonment." I shrugged. "Go ahead. Courts can't force me to work if I don't want to. So now, you are responsible for the mortgage, the car payments, and that new furniture you had to have." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. "What about our savings? The money for the Florida trip?" "I took half. Left you my last paycheck. It'll hit the account in a couple of days. After that, you're on your own." She stared at me, mouth opening and closing, like a fish gasping for air. "Mark, please." I shook my head. "No, Jessica. You made your choice." I grabbed my truck keys and started walking toward the door. "Have a good life." She just stood there, frozen, as I stepped out of the house for the last time. That night, I drove south, pushing through exhaustion until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. I wanted to be as far from that place as possible. I ended up on the Gulf Coast, working construction jobs where no one knew me. I met other guys who had done the same thing. Men running from cheating wives, broken marriages, lives they wanted to leave behind. Meanwhile, my parents kept me updated. Jessica lost her job. John's wife took him to the cleaners in their divorce. He and Jessica never became a couple after that. She ended up working as a cashier at a supermarket, lost the house, the car, everything. 7 years later, I came back, just to see my kids. Jessica never regained their love. My folks had raised them, and they'd grown into good, responsible adults. I saw her one last time, at the supermarket. I went through her checkout line. She looked up, saw me, and turned white as a sheet. "Having a good life, Jessica?" I asked. She fainted. I walked out without looking back. Bruce Finley lay on the cold, grimy concrete, his entire body pulsing with pain. He felt it everywhere, but nowhere worse than his aching, swollen testicles. He shivered uncontrollably, unable to move, helpless. "You feeling better?" That voice again. Calm, almost amused. Who was this guy? Bruce certainly wasn't feeling better. Hell, aside from the whole being conscious part, he almost wished he wasn't. His face felt tight, already swelling from the beating he'd taken. He knew that within 10 minutes, it'd puff up like a balloon. By morning, he'd be a grotesque mess of purple and black bruises, the kind that would linger for weeks. "Your nose looks a little crooked," the voice mused. "That's not good. You might want someone to take a look at that." Bruce's brain was finally starting to catch up with reality, the nightmare of the last few minutes hitting him like a freight train. A warm trickle ran over his hand. He blinked, trying to focus. Blood. His blood. It dripped slowly, thick and dark, pooling on the dirty garage floor. Judging by the amount already there, he must have bled a lot when he hit the ground. Weakly, he lifted his trembling hand and wiped his sleeve across his nose, smearing the blood across his expensive black cashmere coat. "Bruce." The voice was patient now, almost lighthearted. A pause. Then, "Bruce, wake up, sleepyhead. We need to talk." Something about the tone. It wasn't threatening, not exactly. It was casual, like a friend trying to shake him awake after he'd passed out drunk. But this wasn't a hangover. What the hell did this guy want? His stomach twisted violently, the nausea hitting him all at once. He rolled onto his side and vomited. Dry heaves, mostly, since he'd skipped lunch. His body convulsed with each retch, and when he finally stopped, he gasped for breath, his vision swimming. Through the haze, he saw movement. His attacker stepped closer. Bruce flinched, instinctively raising his arms to protect his face. The man slapped them away like they were nothing, then grabbed Bruce's coat with both gloved hands and yanked him upright, slamming him against the concrete pillar. "Hey, asshole." The voice wasn't so friendly now. It was sharp, edged with contempt. "Do you know who I am?" Bruce's head lolled slightly, but he forced himself to focus. He could barely see straight, but he knew that voice was talking to him. "What's my name?" the man demanded. Bruce's swollen lips parted, but no sound came out. He had no idea. His mind was still sluggish, his thoughts jumbled. Another sharp slap. Not as brutal as the earlier blows, but enough to send a fresh jolt of pain through his already battered face. "Bruce, wake up, you stupid weasel. Can you hear me?" Bruce nodded weakly, wiping at the blood that dripped steadily from his nose and brow. The man studied him with cold, measured intensity. He wasn't just some random thug. This wasn't a mugging. This was personal. Bruce tried to focus on his attacker's face. He was a normal-looking guy, a little above average in the looks department, with a square jaw, wavy dark brown hair, and thick eyebrows. His eyes were shadowed in the dim parking garage, but they looked dark. He was about 6 feet tall, maybe a little taller, and even with his wool jacket on, it was obvious. He was built. Bruce had never seen him before in his life. "No," he croaked. I don't think I. Who are you?" The man exhaled sharply, like he was dealing with an idiot. "Are you sure, Bruce?" The tone was slower now, deliberate, like he was speaking to a small child. "Are you absolutely sure you've never seen me before? Not even in a picture?" Bruce squinted, searching his scrambled brain for anything. But there was nothing. I don't think so," he stammered. "No, I've never." His attacker's jaw clenched in frustration. "That's too bad, Bruce." He shook his head, almost disappointed. "If someone's going to do this to you," he gestured vaguely toward Bruce's crumpled body, "don't you think you should at least know why?" Bruce swallowed hard. He had no answer for that. The man started pacing, back and forth, like a caged predator. Then, suddenly, "Bruce." His name was roared with such force that Bruce actually flinched. Silence followed. No echoes in the garage tonight. The man resumed his pacing. "Actions have consequences, Bruce," he muttered. "Everything we do sends ripples out into the world." He stopped, turned, stared Bruce down. Tonight is your echo, Bruce. I am your echo, and I'm enjoying it. A fresh wave of fear rolled over Bruce. The man crouched in front of him, resting his forearms on his knees. Think, Bruce. Think really hard. Why would someone do this to you? Bruce's mouth was dry. His pulse pounded in his ears. The man tilted his head. Have you done something at work? Maybe pissed someone off? Bruce shook his head. No, nothing like that, he whispered. Really? The voice turned skeptical. No big cases you screwed up? No angry clients looking for payback? No, Bruce mumbled. I swear. His attacker sighed and tapped his gloved fingers against his thigh. Okay, then let's try something else. He leaned in. What about your wife? Bruce's stomach dropped. Bridget, the man continued, his tone casual. Think she'd be mad enough to hire me? Pay me to send you a little message? Bruce blinked rapidly. Bridget? How do you? The man smirked. Yeah, she's a real witch, huh? He chuckled, shaking his head. I actually feel kinda bad for you. Must be a real chore, dealing with her. Bruce felt like he was drowning. This man knew everything. Lovely kids, by the way, the man added, almost offhandedly. You should be proud. Bruce's blood ran cold. His kids. The stranger took a deep breath and let it out slowly. So, he continued, if it's not your job, and it's not your wife, what else could it be, Bruce? Bruce felt the pieces clicking into place. His heart rate spiked. His stomach clenched. Oh God. A single name escaped his lips in a whisper. Carrie. His attacker's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. Bruce's breathing grew shallow. His eyes locked onto the man in horror. You're Jack Hogan. Jack Hogan. Carrie's husband. Jack stared at him, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was looking at. Jesus, Bruce, he muttered. You're not too bright, are you? Bruce's entire body trembled as Jack leaned in close. Tell me something, Jack said, his voice dangerously soft. Did you really think it was smart to screw another man's wife? Even putting morality aside, did you ever stop to consider who her husband might be? Bruce swallowed thickly. No, Jack answered for him. You didn't think at all, did you? His smile turned deadly. Now, tell me, Bruce, how long has your little sexathon with my wife been going on? Bruce's voice barely worked. A couple of months, he croaked. Since early September. No earlier than that. Jack nodded slowly, considering his answer. He mused. And then, he smiled. Bruce shuddered. Because that smile? It was terrifying. Jack Hogan stood over Bruce Finley, studying his battered face with a detached curiosity. So, we've established the timeline, he mused. I just wanted to make sure we had that clear. You've been screwing my wife for, what did you say? A couple of months? Over a dozen times? Bruce didn't answer. His body slumped lower against the concrete pillar, his stomach churning with dread. Jack let out a low chuckle. Over a dozen times, he repeated. And all I gave you was a few punches? That hardly seems fair, considering all the fun you had with my wife. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes dark with thought. Then, after a long pause, he nodded to himself. No, he said quietly. It's not enough. Not nearly enough. And I think this is going to have some further implications for you, Bruce. I really do. Bruce's insides turned to ice. Jack crouched down again, bringing his face inches from Bruce's. You do know that Hogan Industries does nearly half of its legal work through your firm, don't you? Bruce swallowed hard. Of course he knew. Hogan Industries was one of Hamilton and Ross's biggest clients, one of 3, in fact. Losing their business would be a massive blow to the firm. Jack seemed to savor Bruce's realization. I'm sure you understand what that means. He tilted his head slightly. You're going to leave your firm, Bruce, and you'll do it gracefully. Bruce's body sagged further. His head dropped in defeat. Jack's voice turned ice cold. And if you haven't resigned by the end of January, I'll make sure you're removed in a way that's far less graceful. The words weren't just a threat. They were a promise. Bruce had no doubt Jack could follow through. Jack straightened, hands sliding into his pockets as he looked down at him. Might be a good idea to find a firm outside the city, he he suggested casually. Won't be too bad. I hear you're a decent lawyer. You'll get a good reference. Bruce let out a slow, shuddering breath. He barely heard Jack's next words. It'll take you a few years to rebuild what you had, of course, Jack continued. But hey, that's just the price of ending another man's marriage, isn't it? Bruce finally lifted his head, looking at Jack, but he still couldn't bring himself to speak. Jack held his gaze for a moment before sighing. Look, I don't want you nearby for your own protection. His tone softened, almost as if he were giving friendly advice. You see, Bruce, right now, I'm feeling very vindictive, and I really don't like feeling that way. He took a slow step back, exhaling deeply, like he was shaking off his anger. It's just not healthy for either of us, he continued. But if you move far, far away, well, temptation will be out of sight. And I won't be tempted to do anything drastic to ease the pain I'm going to be dealing with over the next couple of years. He paused. I don't want to be that kind of guy, Bruce. I hope you understand that. Bruce gave a tiny, barely perceptible nod. Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I knew you'd appreciate that. Then, suddenly, he inhaled deeply. One of those long, meditative breaths, like he was centering himself. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. Let me explain what's going to happen now. Bruce sat there in silence, his body aching, his mind barely able to process what was being said. You're going to go home, Jack said simply. And regardless of what you tell your wife about this evening, you and I, we have never met. Bruce blinked, barely registering the words. Jack smiled slightly. You'll go on with your life, carrying this little memory with you, of course. But nothing more will happen to you. Not from me, at least. He turned and started pacing again. But Bruce? He shot him a look over his shoulder. Don't think too hard about tonight. And don't, for 1 second, get tempted to go to the police. Bruce's mouth went dry. That, Jack said, his voice light and almost conversational, would be a serious mistake. His tone softened even further, like a patient teacher speaking to a struggling student. And you've already seen how I handle serious mistakes. Bruce sat frozen, unable to move. Jack smiled faintly. There will be no physical evidence, he continued. In 30 minutes, everything I'm wearing will be ashes. You won't find anything on me, not even a single bruise on my knuckles. He wiggled his fingers. Padded gloves, you see. Bruce swallowed. And I. Jack's grin widened. I'll have an airtight alibi. And, of course, I'll also have a set of excellent pictures of your last few encounters with my loving wife. Bruce barely reacted. His body was in full shutdown mode now. Jack studied him for a moment before sighing. I thought about sending them to your wife, but nah. She's already going to have enough questions for you when you get home, don't you think? Bruce stared at the ground, silent. Jack continued, your kids, they'd handle a divorce better when they're out of high school. That's why I decided to wait. My own kids are off at college, so I can deal with this later. He waved his hand dismissively. But, Jack added, I have been thinking, if I were to send these pictures to your wife right now, he trailed off, smiling slightly. Bruce felt sick. She'd take everything, Jack mused. I mean, she already makes more than you, doesn't she? Bruce clenched his jaw. So, Jack continued, I think you have plenty of reasons to keep your mouth shut? Bruce nodded once. Just once. Jack smiled wider. Good man. Then, suddenly, he checked his watch. Oh, and one last thing before we part ways. Bruce hesitated. You still have an appointment tonight, Jack said, smirking. Bruce blinked, confused. What? Jack tossed a thick envelope into Bruce's lap. You're going to meet my soon-to-be ex-wife. As planned. Bruce's stomach twisted. Why would I? Jack cut him off with a glare. You're not staying long, he assured him. You're just going to deliver a message. Bruce remained silent. Jack crouched beside him again. First, he said, you're going to tell her you're never seeing her again. Then, you're going to call her a 304 and a witch. She hates that, by the way. Bruce swallowed hard. Then, Jack continued, you'll tell her you regret ever meeting her. And I know that's the truth, isn't it, Bruce? Bruce didn't answer. Jack handed him a second, smaller envelope. Inside, he explained, is some cash, a credit card, and a one-way ticket to Mexico City. She's not coming back? Bruce blinked at him in horror. Oh, and tell her, Jack added, his voice calm but firm, that if she isn't on that plane tonight, Lopez will pay her a visit. Bruce didn't even ask who Lopez was. The answer wouldn't matter. Jack took another deep breath, shedding the last remnants of tension. Then he stepped back. Do exactly what I said, Bruce. His voice was almost gentle now. And remember, I'll be watching. Bruce believed him. Jack gave him one last look, then turned briskly, striding up the ramp to the elevator. He pressed the button. The doors slid open, and he stepped inside. Just before the doors shut, he gave Bruce a final glance. Bruce sat there, shaking. 1 minute later, he struggled to his feet and did exactly as he was told. Until next time, dear listener, if you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next.